What is the single biggest genetic risk factor for late-onset Alzheimer's disease? The answer might surprise you. It's not some crazy defect. It's actually a really subtle difference in a very common protein that's doing a vital job inside your body right this second.
And here it is. The prime suspect is a gene called APOE, and the protein it makes, apolipoprotein E, is going to be the star of our show today.
And this is where things get really interesting. See, in the body, the liver is pretty much the main production hub for APOE. But inside the brain, it's made right there on site by these support cells called astrocytes. Why? Well, the brain has this special security gate, the blood-brain barrier, so it needs its own dedicated cholesterol carrier to deliver that essential building block directly to neurons for things like repair and communication. For late-onset Alzheimer's, and that's over 90% of all cases, the APOE gene is the single most consistent genetic link we have found, period. Funnily enough, it was first discovered in blood plasma, and it took scientists another 20 years to realize, whoa, this thing is a massive player in the brain. Now, to really wrap your head around what APOE does, let's use a little analogy. Because if you just think of it as some random protein, you kind of miss the bigger picture. Think of it more like a crucial delivery service that's running 24/7 throughout your body.
So what kind of delivery service are we talking about? Day in and day out, APOE is busy picking up and dropping off one of the most essential building blocks for pretty much all of our cells. It is, and I mean this quite literally, your body's
cholesterol taxi service. Yep. Its whole job is to grab onto fats and cholesterol, package them up so they're safe, and then drive them through the bloodstream. And, just as importantly, it does the same thing inside the super complex world of our central nervous system, making sure these crucial lipids get exactly where they need to go.
And what's so wild is that APOE is basically working two different jobs in two different places. Out in your body, it's mostly made by the liver to help manage all the fats from your diet. But your brain is like a gated community. It's a closed system. So inside the brain, a totally separate supply of APOE is made by these cool, star-shaped cells called astrocytes. Their whole purpose is to create these little taxis to deliver cholesterol directly to your neurons, which are desperate for it, to build their membranes and send signals. Okay, but here's the twist, and it's a big one. Not all of these cholesterol taxis are built the same. Because of tiny, tiny little variations in our DNA, this super important protein actually comes in 3 slightly different flavors. And that small difference, well, it changes everything. The APOE gene isn't just one thing. It comes in 3 main versions, or alleles. You can kind of think of them as good, neutral, and risky. APOE2 is actually considered neuroprotective. It might even lower your risk. APOE3 is the most common one, and it's considered neutral. And then there's APOE4, the one we're focusing on, and it significantly increases the risk of developing Alzheimer's. And this just shows you how incredibly sensitive our biology is. The gene for APOE has 3 main versions, what we call alleles, E2, E3, and E4. The only difference between them, is the type of amino acid at just 2 spots on the protein chain. Swapping one little building block for another is like changing a single rivet on a car. It can completely change how the whole machine works.
So if you look at the whole world, the E3 version is by far the most common one. You could call it the standard model. But the E4 and E2 versions are still carried by more than 20% of people, which is a huge number. And it's that E4 version that has become a major focus for Alzheimer's researchers.
All right, so let's get to the heart of the matter. How in the world does one version of this fat-carrying protein increase a person's risk for Alzheimer's disease so dramatically? Well, when you see the numbers, they're pretty shocking.
Check out this number, 14.9 times. For Caucasians, that's the increased odds of developing Alzheimer's if you inherit 2 copies of the APOE4 allele, one from your mom, one from your dad, compared to somebody with 2 copies of the common E3 version. It is hands down the biggest genetic risk factor for late-onset Alzheimer's that we know of. And this chart really paints the picture. Even having just 1 copy of E4 more than triples your odds. But having 2 copies? That creates what scientists call a gene dose effect, where the risk just multiplies and shoots up to nearly 15 times higher. It's an incredibly powerful link between this one gene variant and the disease.
Okay, now after hearing all that, it would be so easy to think that having APOE4 is a genetic death sentence. But I need to be super, super clear here. It is absolutely not. And this part right here, this is probably the most important takeaway of this entire explainer. Having the E4 allele is a risk factor. It is not a diagnosis.
I mean, listen to this quote. It says everything. A huge chunk of Alzheimer's patients, between 40 and 65%, have at least one copy of E4. But, and this is the key, it is not a determinant of the disease. In other words, your genes might load the gun, but they don't decide whether the trigger gets pulled. So let's just put all this in perspective, because this is so important. First, APOE4 only increases the risk, the probability. So many people with E4 live long, sharp lives and never develop Alzheimer's. Second, and this is huge, about a third of all Alzheimer's patients don't even have the E4 allele, which just proves other things are at play. And finally, on the flip side, the E2 version, the rarest one, actually seems to be a little bit protective, slightly lowering your risk.
And all of this leaves us with the biggest, most hopeful question of all. We've seen this incredible, direct link between how we handle fat and the health of our brain. But it's obviously not the whole story. So if our genes are just loading the gun, what else is out there in our lives, in our diet, in our environment that's actually pulling the trigger? Finding that answer, well, that's the next great frontier in fighting this disease.
All right, so we've identified our culprit. Now we need to understand its MO, its modus operandi. How does this one slightly misshapen protein become an architect of so much brain damage? Well, it does it by getting its hands dirty in the two classic telltale hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease. First, let's talk about the gain of toxic functions. These are the harmful new jobs that APOE4 takes on. It binds really aggressively to beta amyloid, which directly seeds the formation of those sticky plaques. It also promotes the creation of those tau tangles inside the neurons. And to top it all off, it overactivates the brain's immune cells, leading to chronic neuroinflammation that just further damages brain tissue. So not only is APOE4 helping build up junk outside the cell, it's also causing total chaos on the inside. It actually encourages that tau protein to get sticky and tangle-prone in the first place. This leads to the instability of the cell's internal structure, the collapse of its skeleton, and just a general acceleration of this whole toxic process. It's a true two-pronged attack on the brain. But the damage goes even deeper. You might think plaques and tangles would be enough, but we're now learning that APOE4's impact is much, much broader. It doesn't just commit these two specific crimes, it wages a wider war, causing a systemic failure across the brain's most critical systems. So, beyond the plaques and tangles, what else is this rogue gene up to? It turns out it launches a war on multiple fronts against the brain's communication lines, its energy supply, and even its most basic sanitation services. First, it sabotages communication. It directly impairs a critical pathway called reeling, which is absolutely essential for our ability to learn and form new memories. It can also cause neurons to get hyperactive, firing too much until they completely burn out. On top of that, it even stops the brain's support cells from doing their job of pruning or cleaning out old, inefficient connections to make way for new ones. Next, it triggers a massive energy crisis. APOE4 makes it harder for neurons to take up glucose, which is their main source of fuel. This contributes to what some scientists are now calling type 3 diabetes, a state of insulin resistance in the brain. And to make matters even worse, it directly damages the mitochondria, the tiny power plants inside every cell, leading to less energy and more toxic oxidative stress. And finally, it completely shuts down the cleanup crew. APOE4 actively suppresses a process called autophagy, which is the cell's natural garbage disposal and recycling system. You can think of it like the city sanitation department just going on strike. All the damaged parts and toxic proteins, including amyloid and tau, just don't get cleared away, allowing them to pile up and cause even more damage. So, I know, that all sounds incredibly bleak. But if APOE4 is such a central villain in this story, what can we actually do about it? Well, here's the good news. Because we have such a clear genetic target, scientists are coming up with some seriously clever ways to try and disarm it. There are a few really exciting strategies in the works. One is gene therapy, where the goal is literally to deliver the genetic code for the protective APOE2 gene directly into the brain of someone with APOE4. Another approach uses special antibodies, almost like heat-seeking missiles, to hunt down and clear out the toxic APOE4 protein. And maybe the coolest idea is something called small molecule correctors.
These are drugs designed to actually grab onto the APOE4 protein and change its physical shape, essentially tricking it into behaving like the much safer APOE3 version. But even with all of this incredible progress, this case is far from closed. The simple fact is that APOE4 is a complex enemy, and its role in Alzheimer's presents a huge challenge for researchers and doctors trying to fight back. And this really brings us to the final crucial question we have to ask. Given that APOE4 helps build plaques, create tangles, ruin synapses, cause an energy crisis, and a whole host of other problems, can a single therapy, just one silver bullet, ever be enough? Or is the future of treatment going to require a whole cocktail of drugs that can fight this genetic accomplice on every single front it attacks? It's a question researchers are racing to answer, because that answer might just hold the key to a future without Alzheimer's.